If you want to be a successful copywriter, consultant, or really any kind of online marketer, you need to master 5 different things. And if you miss even just one of them, that's going to mean you make far less money, work far harder than you need to, and end up working for clients who really don't value or respect you. So if you don't want to be treated like a glorified intern, here are the 5 things you need to do. So the first thing is to actually be good at what you do. Now, I'm going to use copywriting as an example here because that's my background. And I think that now it's really overlooked to actually be a decent copywriter. There's a lot of people out there who are using different prompts, who are writing copy that kind of sounds good, but they've really got no idea of the basics. They've not studied people like Gary Halbert, like Dan Kennedy, like John Colton. And actually, even if you say these names to them, they just look at you like they're a bit confused. And that's a big problem because this was kind of where copy all started. Now, I know that things have moved on. We're not selling the same products. We don't even use the same language as we used to. But these guys really had to work to make sales. They're around in the days when you didn't have things like QR codes and retargeting and all that kind of stuff. They actually had to work. They had to get people to take out a checkbook and write a check. They had to get people to mail stuff in. And it took a lot longer for things to get to people as well. So if you don't know who these guys are, you really should do. And yeah, I get that it might sound a bit outdated for me telling you to go back and read stuff from guys around in the 70s and the 80s, and maybe like even the 20s and the 30s. But honestly, doing that is one of the best ways you'll get better faster. So some really good resources you can go to. First of all, I'm a fan of books. I don't think you can learn to be a great copywriter purely from reading books, but they're a nice way to just dip your toe in and get to grips with some of the greats. There's websites that have got classic copy as well, so places like swipe.co. And honestly, just immersing yourself in copy and getting used to reading what good copy looks like is a great way to do that. Then you actually need to do some writing. And I know that's maybe a bit old-fashioned now when we're told that AI prompts can do basically everything. But again, actually writing is the only way you get better at this. So for me, when I was starting out, an hour a day writing was the absolute minimum. And that didn't include client work. That would just be the stuff that I would do in my spare time. So I would go and write articles. I would hand copy sales letters. I'd go through my email inbox and I'd write my own versions of emails that come through. And a lot of people won't do that because it sounds like hard work. And honestly, it is hard work. Like doing anything you're not getting paid for, that takes effort and it takes dedication. Do you want to succeed or do you not? In my book, it was always worth the risk of taking that time to learn this skill. So as boring as it is, the first step on your path to earning 100K a year as a copywriter is to just be a better copywriter. The second thing to do is get good at dealing with people. This one is difficult for a lot of people in our world because we tend to be a bit more introverted. We like to hide behind a screen. And I don't know about you, but I absolutely hate being on Zoom calls. However, it's still a person-to-person business. Most people in marketing, they're a bit geeky, a bit dorky, possibly, and cancel me for saying this, a bit on the spectrum, but we have to get good at dealing with clients. For me, I think coming from a personal training background helped a lot. I was 24, 25 when I started getting into copy, and I've been personal training since I was 18. When I got into PT, I had very few people skills. I was shy, I was anxious, I didn't really like talking to people. But being forced to make conversation for 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9 or 10 hours a day with, at the time, people who were much older than me, that was a great way to learn about what made people tick, how to make small talk, reading people's emotions, all that kind of stuff. It was super helpful, and so if you're someone who's not naturally extroverted, you're not a natural conversationalist, maybe you just prefer your own company, it really pays to get good at dealing with people. Ultimately, clients will often go for the copywriter who they like being around, who's the one who kind of talks to them about cool stuff, who's basically fun, who's honest and who's reliable, over a copywriter who's a bit better, but is a real pain to work with. Third, make connections. There's a really cliched phrase, your network is your net worth. And while we can argue the semantics of that and whether it's 100% true, it does kind of bear out. The people who I know in the copywriting consulting world who make the most money, they tend to be the ones who have a really good network. When you've got a good network, you kind of don't need to worry about where the next client is coming from. You've always got irons in the fire, and even if you've not got something on your plate and you're scrubbing around a bit for work, if the more people you've got who you can just call and say like, hey, I could do with a new client, or do you know anyone who's looking for this, the easier it is to get that next gig over the line. And what's funny is that often if you have a good network, it doesn't even really matter how good you are. I've had so many referrals over the years from people who I've never actually worked with and never written copy for, but they've referred me to friends, to business partners, to their clients, purely because they know me as the guy who writes funny posts on Facebook. And obviously we need to couple that with point number one of actually being good at what you do. But at the same time, just knowing people and just being likable, it's a really simple way to grow your business. So I would say do two things. First up, do some formal networking. Some of these formal networking groups are a bit awkward, they're a bit wanky, like they're not for people like us. But I still think there's some merit in going to those. More than that though, I would try and get yourself in masterminds or go up to meetups with marketers. So for example, I've started going to a group near me called the Marketing Meetup. You get people there from all walks of marketing, whether it's like branding people, whether it's strategists, people who do content, you've got SEO guys, web designers, all that kind of thing. I've not got a lot of business from there, but it's just a good place to bounce some ideas around, meet new people, and build a bit of a bigger network. You've also got paid masterminds, and I'm a massive fan of paid masterminds. Yes, it's an investment. You're looking at probably at least a couple of grand a year, up to potentially 6, sometimes even 7 figures for a mastermind. Obviously, don't start there if you're broke. I'm not saying to do that. But if you can start with something where there is a price for entry, you're going to get around so many people who can introduce you to others or maybe even want to hire you themselves. And then you've also got informal networking. I'm a massive fan of just being around other people who are doing similar stuff to you. I don't really see any other copywriters and consultants as competition. I see them as people who could open doors for other opportunities. So don't get in that mindset of thinking like, oh, if I'm talking with another copywriter who might be going for the same client, that's a bad thing. It's absolutely not. Like, make friends with people because friends want to help each other out. And without sounding woo-woo, when you've got a network who are super positive and want to send business your way, again, business just gets so much easier. Fourth is charge more. Another one that maybe seems obvious, and you've probably watched videos from some ridiculous, overly Americanized person who tells you to like just whack a zero on the end of your prices. And they'll throw around cliche phrases and all that kind of stuff. I worked in the high ticket space for about 7 years, so I get all of that. And weirdly, there's actually a lot of merit to it, right? It does kind of work, but if you're anything like me, you probably just feel a bit awkward about going, well, I used to charge $1,000 for that, now I'm going to charge 20. You feel a bit icky, a bit overly salesy, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you do need to charge more. It is absolutely true that clients who are well established, maybe they've got a bit of a name in their space, they're experts themselves, they're actually really skeptical when your prices are too low. I found this out maybe like 18 months ago when I was running a consulting program. And we had 2 guys who were looking to join us, both within the same business. And the one of them got on the sales call. We're talking and kind of going through the program and everything. He said, yeah, sounds great. I think we'd love to do it. Let me just chat with the business partner. He came back and said to me, the partner's on board, but he's wondering why it's so cheap and what the catch is. And it was a genuine consideration. It was a concern that he had. And that was a big light bulb for me that like, okay, I thought I'd been doing this already with higher prices, but actually to attract that higher value of client, you probably need to go a step up in your prices. A lot of the time, if you think you're charging the right amount, you're probably charging a bit too low. And if you think you're charging a bit too low, you are definitely charging a bit too low. And clients actually respect you when you charge more. Obviously, again, there is a line. Unless you're a Dan Kennedy or a Clayton Makepeace or someone like that, you're probably not going to charge $100,000 for one single copy package. But there's a happy medium somewhere there. You've got a skill that is very highly valuable. And I know that sometimes it doesn't seem it, especially with AI, especially when a lot of weird people with their rented supercars and their open neck shirts, all that kind of stuff, when they've portrayed this as some kind of biz-op lifestyle and they're being really flashy all online. That's probably not the kind of person you are if you're watching this video. So I do get that there's some resistance there. At the same time, however, what you're offering to clients is massive. I will always say to the mentees that I work with, I'll say, look, you might be working with someone who's got an online program that costs $5,000. You're charging $2,000 a month for their emails, and you're probably making them 10, 20, even 50 sales a month. There will be some costs involved in that, but can you see how your work is that valuable? So if you're working for a client and thinking, why are they getting rich while I'm not? That's probably something you need to address. The fifth and final point is understand why people buy. There are a lot of copywriters out there who write copy that sounds really good, but it doesn't often convert. And the big reason for that is because they don't really understand why people buy. And as AI moves into the writing space more and more, it's only going to become more important to understand that. Not just that, but every single market is getting more advanced. And so the stuff that worked even 5 years ago isn't working so well now, purely because the market has heard all the same promises, they've heard the same claims, they've been aware to it for years and years, and they're kind of catching on. So every successful campaign that I run, I really look beneath the surface, and rather than focusing on the headlines, the calls to action, even like the big claims and the big problems, I will look much more about, okay, what's actually different about this offer? Is there something in the unique mechanism that the market isn't talking about? Is there a secondary problem that it solves? Like that smaller problem that every offer may do something for, but very few other competitors in the marketplace are talking about it. And really, this is about understanding why people buy. So there's a quote I love from Rory Sutherland that says, "The human brain runs on logic about as much as a horse runs on petrol," which basically says we are irrational beings. We don't necessarily make purchasing decisions because it's the right thing to do. Even down to stuff like the socks you buy or the toothpaste that you use a couple of times every day, even that stuff will be decided on emotion, not on logic. So get used to dealing with people's emotions. Look into people like Daniel Kahneman, study people like Amos Tversky, look up Robert Cialdini. All those guys, they made their living and they've got thousands of published studies between them, all about how the human brain actually works and about behavior. And if you look at people like Rory Sutherland, who I mentioned, or someone like Dave Trott, even like an Alex Hormozy, look at how much they get paid and then look at how much writing they actually do. Now, this is more of a copywriter specific one, but if you're still sitting there and you're only paid for the words that you write, that kind of says that you're missing the mark a bit. The guys I just mentioned, they're paid for their ideas. They're paid for them to say to someone, there's one thing you could fix your marketing, do that and everything will change. Now, that's not to say that they're phoning it in and they're doing like 5 minutes work and getting paid thousands, because obviously there's a lot of work that's gone up to them getting to that level. But at the same time, if you're not working towards that, that's always going to limit your earning potential. And some of this might sound easier said than done. You might be going, well, that's fine, but those guys have got an established reputation and maybe they've got a behavioral science degree. But it's kind of like anything. It's a skill. Being great at idea generation and being able to spot those psychological triggers, you can learn that just like you would learn emails, VSLs, and writing a headline. So my best recommendation for that, without always pitching my own stuff, I'd say check out my ABP Mastery course. I'll put a link down in the description below. But outside of that, just get reading. Have a look at books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, or Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. Dave Trott, who I mentioned, any of his stuff is absolute gold, or obviously the Cialdini works. So you've got a cheap option there as well. Ultimately, getting to your first 100K as a copywriter is a mix of different things. And I'm very aware that 100K is one of those figures that kind of doesn't mean anything. You can be living in central London or central New York, earning 100K and it might not feel like that much. Likewise, you could be living in a Vietnam or a Bali or somewhere like that, earning 100K, and you live like a king, right? Money is not the be all and end all. But I think for most people, getting to 100K will provide an amazing lifestyle, a ton of freedom. It shows that you're pretty well established, and actually it's a real financial safety net. Not just that, it's more than doable. So go back through this video, take note of those 5 things. If you think I missed anything, let me know in the comments below.